see my panel is primed and ready to go. So this session, we'll be talking about sustainability, driving low-carbon logistics. Sustainability goals from industry, from government, are redefining what good looks like. But building the net zero carbon network is arguably one of the toughest challenges the industry is going to face and supply chain is going to face. Especially when survival is a primary objective for so many in the industry right now. My panel here today represent key stakeholders across the supply chain, here to discuss theirs and how the wider industry are and must investing and implementing new strategies, new solutions to drive low-carbon logistics and decarbonise the supply chain. So, I'd like to welcome my guests. First up, we have Flavio Batista, Senior Vice President of Sales Americas at Wallenius Wilhelmsen. We have Sharman Dobbs, Director of Business Development from Accelerated Services. And we have Kurt Watson, Senior Manager, Logistics Purchasing from Nissan. So welcome to my panel. So let's get into it. Let's begin. Kurt, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. So looking at sustainability across the whole supply chain, how does vehicle logistics compare to inbound, in-plant, service plant, in terms of carbon footprint, greenhouse gases emissions?
Well, I would say, from a Nissan standpoint, we look at it all holistically. How does finished vehicle logistics compare to the others? I think when we talk about equipment, transportation for equipment, whether that be for parts or for finished vehicles, it's essentially the same equipment that we're looking at, right? I mean, modifications, whether you're looking at electric trucks, whether you're on inbound or outbound, those are essentially going to be the same. I think when we talk about low carbon, right, I don't think there's any way to go to no carbon. But when we talk about low carbon, certainly right now, rail plays a big piece in that, right? Rail is probably our most fuel efficient, lowest carbon transportation mode. On the vehicle side, we ship about 50% of our vehicles out of our plants on rail. So that kind of helps us out there. Whereas on our inbound network, we don't use as much rail. You can switch over parts from 53-foot dry vans to rail, but there's a lot of operational challenges that, and hurdles that you have to get over to do that. So I would say it's primarily right now still a lot of box van. And then we've got the facility side, and you have a lot more creativity, I think, on the facility side. Nissan has its sustainability goals, just like all OEMs do. And so, a lot of that starts in our plants and facilities where we have control, interplant conveyances. So we're looking at electric trucks there. We're looking at, we already run electric forklifts and tuggers. So I think that's probably where the furthest along is in facilities. But just like 80-20, right? I think on the finished vehicle side, that last, you can get there, you can get halfway there, but that last half is really difficult. So I think the finished vehicle, we've got a long way to go on reducing our carbon emissions in that network.
Absolutely, and perhaps sticking with you, with inventory levels so low right now and focusing purely on vehicle logistics, speed to market is clearly crucial. We've heard that throughout today, and we'll continue to hear that, no doubt. But with industry facing equipment misalignment, capacity bottlenecks, various challenges we don't need to keep recovering, how much is your hand forced when kind of selecting those modes, and how does the selection of transport mode in terms of sustainability come into play when it's all about getting vehicle to market right now?
Well, sustainability is a long-term goal, right? Certainly right now with the challenges that we face, we have crews daily or teams daily working on finding the best way to get the car to the market as quickly as we can. So Yeah, I would say right now, first and foremost, from our operations standpoint, moving vehicles is paramount versus sustainability, but it's still part of our everyday planning, right? Our long-term strategy to drive carbon out. But right now, it's more about flexibility and just being able to get the right car to the right place at the right time as quickly as possible.
Yeah, perfect. And perhaps I'll bring in the rest of the panel as well, just in terms of the extreme challenges that we face. To build on that point, how can sustainability still play a part when there are clearly so many challenges being faced day to day? Can sustainability still be a top priority?
Please.
I think that's a tough one. I mean, the goals that are out there are huge. I mean, by 2030, I think it's a 40% reduction in California, and by 2050, it's 80%. I think that's an unrealistic goal at this point, especially with what's happened in the last couple of years. I don't know how we're all going to focus on that because, I mean, it's a huge risk, and we're all going to have to share in the risk.
I would agree with that. I think despite of what's happening now in the industry, we just don't have the luxury to put that on hold, right? So I think to Kurt's point, it's a long-term investment, and it's a journey that we all have to, be part of that journey. I think we've all embarked, in that journey, so there is no way back. By 2050, we have to, at least IMO have already set that goal, that's zero emission. So how do we get there? So it's not a decision that's going to be made today, but it's a long, course.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And sticking with you, Flavio, perhaps you can share some insights on some of the key drivers, shaping sustainability roadmaps, particularly in the ocean sector.
Sure. I'll probably start with regulations, right? And when we talk about regulations, we talk about short and long term, as we just discussed. So probably the second one will be fuel. What's the right fuel for the future, which leads to probably the third one, propulsion, right? A lot of discussions, we'll probably get into more discussions around that. What is the right propulsion for the future? There are many options out there. And probably the last one I would say is cost. There is also a number of discussions about, green is expensive. Yes, it still is expensive, but how do we collectively together with, the new regulations, make greener more affordable.
Absolutely. You mentioned the regulations there. Can you delve a little bit deeper, share some of the regulatory plans and targets, particularly from the IMO, for our audience?
Sure. And by the way, we keep talking about IMO, right? So now you have EU as well, very keen on regulations for low carbon. But there is a new one that it's probably known already for the audience here, which is a CII, which is the Carbon Intensity Index that will be enforced already in January next year. So between now and then, it's this next 6 months that we have to get ready for that. And basically what that is they are trying to look at, on a vessel level. It's not about the fleet you run, but on the vessel specifically. They are rating the ships, from A to E, and then based on there is a formula there that the IMO came up with, but it's based on the size and the utilization, the speed. There you go. So long story short, what that will do is we'll all have to slow down, our ships. So then we start thinking about it. So if you have to reduce the speed, what's going to happen then? You're going to artificially take capacity out of the market. So we don't have the final numbers yet, at least when it comes from our point of view within WW Group, but just looking at the ships or the fleet that we have now and what we heard about the industry, it could be as much as 20% of the capacity that will be taken out, just by reducing speed. So now, Richard, if you look at the challenges we face today with capacity constraints, now if you have to go, whether it's 10% or 20% starting January next year, that would just put more stress to our supply chain.
Yeah, absolutely. So potentially frightening numbers there. I'm presuming that the car makers are aware of this potential bottleneck. This is something that's coming fairly quickly as well. What are the sort of strategies, what are you thinking to plan for this? Jump to you, Kurt.
In the short term, I think what we have to do is provide consistent production, right? I mean, we have to provide a more consistent supply of vehicles. Chris spoke about some of the challenges that we have with that right now. If you're talking about a 20% reduction in capacity, we have to build consistency, and then we have to plan for that reduction in capacity, right? I mean, the same number of cars can go on a ship, it's just going to move slower, so you basically lose some of those turns. Long term, I think you have to build vehicles where you sell vehicles, right? I mean, that's the key, is you have to build those cars here in the U.S. if you're going to sell cars in the U.S. So I think that's probably the long term, but at least for now, we have to provide a more stable production network. More stable production networks are going to lead to more stable supply chain networks. And we have to treat the 15th day of the month and the 30th day of the month exactly the same, right? We can't go and push both from the manufacturer side and from our carrier side. Every day has to be the same. We have to get away from month-end pushes, quarter-end pushes.
Sharman, Flavio mentioned about the slowing down, reduction of speed of some of the vessels. Is that something that's even thinkable when it comes to trucks in terms of fuel consumption, reducing emissions that way? We spent a lot of time today talking around increasing driver productivity. Is this part of the thinking? Is this a viable strategy?
It absolutely is. I mean, we actually, when we bring our drivers in and we train them, we actually train them to slow down. It saves, depending on the situation, 10 to 20%. It's also safer, so there's that. But, I looked at it the other day, and if you calculate 100 miles and you slow down from 75 to 65, it only costs you about 12 minutes. So it's not huge, but if, as you go up, obviously, 200 miles is about 25 minutes. So there's benefits as well, safety, like I said, and that's huge right now, I think, for all OEMs. So it's definitely something we look at.
It's an interesting perspective. And Flavio, you mentioned as well about fuels playing a key part, so I'm keen to delve a little bit deeper. There's a lot of fuel technology out there, greener fuel technology from ammonia to LNG, biofuels, methanol, synthetics. Where does Wallenius stand on this? What's your strategy, your vision going forward, and how does it fit?
Yeah, that's definitely the million-dollar question, right? So there are so many options right now. So I think when you look at the options that are out there, and it's part of the reason why you haven't seen a lot of new builders out there. Everybody's waiting. The industry is waiting to see what's the best technology, the best solution as far as fuel. So from a WW point of view, so we haven't really decided that yet. We don't believe there is a silver bullet. So probably the answer to that is we'll be using all of them. So we're having a lot of discussions now internally, based on the number of ships we want to order and what kind of technology we want to use. So if you go back to the 2050 target that's been set, about zero emissions. So when you make a commitment to order a new ship, it's a 25 to 30 year commitment, right? So that will take us to 2050 already. Not to say the investment, it's $80+ million, to build a ship. So we'll probably go and test, different technologies. We'll probably end up ordering, different, fuel propulsions, and see the one that's, has the best impact.
Absolutely. And does fuel availability and the infrastructure around that dictate which ports are kind of utilizing it or built, geared up to utilize new greener fuels? Is that going to impact the ro-ro market, trading lanes, shipping lanes?
You might, right? So if you go back, 2 years ago or 3 years ago now, between end of 2018 and 2019, when we had to go from low sulfur to extra low sulfur fuel. So there was a lot of concerns about availability, and it was out there, right? So I think when you talk about LNG or ammonia or hydrogen, maybe it's not everywhere, it's not every port, but that's why we're looking at dual fuel as well. So we're looking at different options and see what's the best fit for us.
And speaking of options, in terms of the trucking, Sharman, I'm going to come to you. Electrification appears to be the future certainly for passenger vehicles. But what about the heavy-duty trucks, car haulers? Is this a viable option?
Yes, I think it is. So there's a lot of issues around that. It's very expensive. The Class 8 trucks for auto haul are much more expensive, even with the incentives from the California government. They're still more. Secondly, I mean, you don't know, the maintenance is an unknown. We've talked a lot about that. Maintenance, where are you going to get maintenance? How much is it going to cost? I mean, no idea at this point. Next thing would be they're heavier. I mean, about 10,000 pounds. So what is that? 2 cars. It costs us 2 cars. So that's an issue. Range is shorter. And again, that's something that's an unknown. We have to play with that. We have to take the trucks and test them and, start small and work our way up. And lastly, and all we've talked about, I feel like for the past month, is infrastructure everywhere I've gone. So infrastructure is the toughest thing. We have a project we're working on. We have to start with mobile charging stations, because the infrastructure it's going to take 12 to 18 months. I mean, it's a tough thing. It's very expensive. And it's crazy to me because the California government, they basically are giving grants and vouchers and stuff for the trucks and for private public charging stations. But when it comes to private charging stations, they don't help. Yet they want these big Class 8 semis off the road, but they won't help. And so there's a lot of work to be done around that. So it is something that we're working on, and we have a project in the works, but right now, you can't be too nosy, Richard.
I can try. And you did mention electric trucks as part of your thinking, kind of in your first answer. Can you delve a little bit deeper into kind of what those sort of programs and strategies and ideas look like?
I think electric right now, because it's the most accessible and prevalent from an equipment standpoint, but like Flavio said, we're looking at all different fuels, right? I mean, maybe electric's the answer, maybe it's not. Maybe hydrogen's the answer. I'm waiting for somebody to come out with a nuclear fusion reactor ship or truck or locomotive. I know there's some railroads out there, so we're kind of at this point, I think we're open to any of those fuels. But it does come down to infrastructure. At the moment, I think we did a really good job of proliferating electric car charging infrastructure. In Tennessee, we've got, it's maybe not as easy to find an electric car charger as it is in California, but they're certainly not hard to find. But for bigger vehicles, that infrastructure just doesn't exist today. So I think that's probably for us where we're kind of watching now. Other things like Sharman said, maintenance. How do you what is the maintenance cost for a Nikola or a Kenworth EV truck? And we all know you should always take your car to the dealership to get it serviced. So there's your answer there. You take it to the dealership and get it serviced.
If there is a dealership.
Yeah, but I would say we're open right now. We do have a trial that we're launching. It's very small. We're covering multiple models of trucks because we want to see what works. We want to see what holds up the best. So that's kind of where we're heading.
Yeah, great. And picking up that point around infrastructure, from your perspective, we talk about this 2050 goal. Are we are we on target to meet that goal, or do things really need to happen? You say there seems to be a little bit of waiting to kind of see what happens. What's going to be that tipping point? Is it going to be investment from the private sector? Is it going to be investment from the public sector? A combination of the both? And kind of what needs to happen to really sort of turn the dial on these discussions and investments?
I think we all would like to see a decision made on which direction to go, right? I mean, that's the thing right now is the regulations that are in place are kind of vague. We know there are other regulations coming, but you know, if you're going to go make an investment into a vessel that you're going to have to run for 30 years, it'd be great to have a little direction on what it's going to look like in 30 years. So I think that's kind of what a lot of people are waiting on now. I think there's money in the private sector. There just needs to be a little more certainty on which direction we're going.
And there's so much funding out there. And what we found is that when I went, you know, and did all this research, is that there's so much funding, but it's so confusing. And there's actually companies out there that's all they do, is they sort through the mess for you. And they take a cut. I mean, that's how confusing, and there's more than one company that does that. I mean, I met like 5 different companies that do that, and that is their sole job. And that's just insane to me that it's that confusing and that tough.
So there's a lack of standardization right now when it comes to that?
I don't know if it's standardization as much as it's hard to figure out, you know, and so yeah, I don't.
Different states have different rules, and so you know when you're it's almost like you have to go through the whole process and get your lawyers and these companies that will process the paperwork and sort through the regulations, but you have to do that in every state. Sometimes they vary from county to county, city to city, within states. So it is very confusing at the moment.
So is this directly impacting network design and routing from your perspective? And Flavio, same to you. How are you managing regulations differing from state to state? California brought in, recent at-birth regulations, which I don't believe are equal across the states. So how do you kind of manage that level of inequality when it comes to regulations?
Yeah, that definitely becomes a challenge, right? It's been, said here, whether it's a state by state or, country or continent by continent, right? So if you look at, the at birth, even the infrastructure, we have to be built in 2.5 years, right? So the at birth for, I guess, if you're not aware of, you have to be at zero emission as you're alongside a port. So basically you got to shut off all the engines, on the ship and plug that in. So what that does is, we have to retrofit, the existing fleet of ships we have, and the ports will have to also get ready for that infrastructure. So it doesn't exist now. Just talking to some colleagues here, from Port Authority as well. So not only the investment that's massive, talking about, 60 or 50 plus $1 million, where would that money come from? Will come from private sector, will come from state, will come from, federal money. But also for us is, as a ship, a shipping line, the existing fleet will have to be retrofitted. The cost now will be different every time we're alongside. There is a enormous, cost for us to be zero emissions. And then the new ships, as we order the new ships, they'll have to be ready for that. So that's a challenge to juggle between, local or regional, regulations versus, global regulations.
Yeah. But you also have to think, right? I mean, so we chatted about this earlier, Flavio. It's if that requirement is only applicable in California, then do you say, instead of converting all of these ships over to meet the California standard, we're only going to run 4 ships to California, right? I mean, you rework your network, your routing to say, I'm going to run fewer ships, maybe bigger, ships to California, and then these other ships we're just not going to call California with.
there is definitely a risk there, right? So whether you start building, hub-spoken, scenarios where you bring, cargo to a port on a bigger ship, and then they have feeders. But I believe the network that you see today might look different in a couple of years, for those reasons, right? So I think you still have to call, California ports, right? So there's a huge market here. There is demand for that, but the number of calls, it might be different, in the future. So although I still believe in, as representing WW here, so WW has been investing in, for many years and committed to, to the environment, right? So we all have to do our piece, and it might cost more in the beginning, but I think we all win in the long run. But yeah, that's a great concern, for us.
Something that I found as well in talking to people is everybody's afraid to make a step because they're worried that it's the wrong step or that everything is going to change in 5 years. So why invest in this? To your point of maybe we just change the California ships. Everybody's afraid to make a step because they're afraid it's the wrong step. What if I buy electric trucks and then hydrogen's better or whatever? So I found that a lot, to your point.
Excellent. And so stakeholders across the value chain are all facing rising costs. OEMs investing heavily, new products, revamping new processes for more sustainable methods. But, is there a willingness to invest in sustainable supply chain solutions too? Flavia, you touched upon it that greener solutions can be more expensive, are more expensive. Is there an acceptance from the market that this is the case? Is there a willingness to invest?
Maybe we should let the OEM, answer that, but I'll give it a try. So I think it's
well,
about.
We'll come to Kurt, I'm sure.
You heard many times today already, about collaboration, right? So I don't think, unless you collaborate, whether it's shipping, trucking with the OEM, with a proper forecast, with proper production. So it's about, sweating the asset, right? It's about optimizing, the entire supply chain, I think, to try to, be a little bit greener than we are today, but it still be cost competitive. So if you try to take different path and, go solo, I don't think that's, we're going to be successful, because then the cost will continue going up.
I know the answer to this question. I mean, OEMs love to pay more.
I don't think we have a choice. I don't think we have a choice to whether we decide to invest or not. I mean, we're going to have to meet changing regulations, and so we're going to have to do the investment. So I don't, I think we need to be cautious in where we make those investments. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to invest in, beta versus VHS, right? I mean, it's so. But no, I don't think we have a choice. We definitely have to make the investment. It's part of Nissan's sustainability goals to meet our commitments for 2030 and for 2050. So I think a lot of that, though, I mean, there's a lot of that comes from optimizing what we have now, right? When I talk to the railroads, they go, what is it they say? They go 500 miles on a gallon of fuel, and I don't remember how many tons it is, right? I mean, we already have lower carbon modes of transportation. It's really about the flexibility to push what we can to those modes, to take the modes that aren't as fuel efficient and try and make them more fuel efficient, and then to get to zero. You can't get to zero. You have to optimize what you can, reduce what you can, and then offset from there.
A crystal ball moment. So when will we get to the point where the greener solution is also the most economical? Why should we have to pay more for a greener solution? So when will that tipping point be?
I mean, I think hydrogen will eventually be the solution as far as most economical. I think that's, we need an extra crystal ball for that because it's such an unknown, and back to your last question, I mean, with in the short term, we're going to have to be strategic in the way that we have our contracts set up until we really know true costs. So, the greener solution being the most economical, I don't know that that'll ever be the case. I mean, the price will come down, I think, but I don't know that it'll ever be the most economical.
If you talk to somebody, from IMO, or if you read about it, so why do they enforce, or all these regulations, right? So what they want really is for us to be more efficient, right? So for supply chain, for shipping, to be more efficient. So I think it's a long road, as Kurt said before, right? So I think until we get to a point, that's a acceptable level of emissions, it's going to cost us a lot because we're way behind, right? So where is that, turning point? So I don't know if it's in 5 or 10 years, but I'm pretty confident at some point we're going to get there where, it's a little bit more balanced.
And Kurt, I want to pick up on the point about contracts. So I'll make you sweat a little bit here, but there's been a trend of, especially with the current market, contracts shortening, being an avoidance of committal to kind of long-term contracts right across the supply chain. But you mentioned right at the start that sustainability is a long-term investment. So does that mindset need to change when it comes to contracts, agreements, and developing those partnerships to achieve sustainability goals?
Definitely. I mean, especially right now. I mean, we'll see when we do reach some point of saturation with one technology or the other. I hope somebody wrote down that Sherman says 5 years from now it's all going to be hydrogen, because I'd love to talk about that when we're sitting here in 5 years. But I think at some point when you get market saturation, then contracts will go generally to what they are now. We really haven't shifted to short-term contracts even through this. Our length of contract has stayed predominantly the same, whether we're talking about trucking or rail. But certainly for some of these projects that we're working on, there are some shared risk, and so our contracts look different for those. There is more of a commitment on behalf of Nissan to support a project for a length of time. It's not a completely variable contract. So, we're right now in the ones that we have with the partners that we're doing those projects with. Yeah, we certainly are not going with our standard terms and conditions, but making sure that we have some equal risk share in it.
Yeah, interesting. And to the two of you, are you seeing from your customer side, those kind of conversations changing, adapting, evolving, particularly around contracts, agreements, and developing partnerships?
When it comes to this subject, there really hasn't been a whole lot of conversations yet in Auto Hall about contracts with, sustainability. So, but in general, I think that it's tough for us as auto carriers to have a short contract, the 3-year. We set up a whole production, a whole team on office, staff, everything, and then 3 years is up in no time. It's really tough in general. So I think if we're going to invest in trucks that are even more expensive, that haul less vehicles, I think that the contract should be longer.
Yeah, we haven't seen any changes. I think sustainability is just a piece of the puzzle, right? So we have long-term contracts with most of our customers, and it hasn't changed. Unless it will change in the future, but right now it has remained the same.
And Kurt, you mentioned optimization of existing network and equipment and service providers. Digital tools, digitalization, does that come into it? And what are Nissan doing in terms of their investment into that area that can support optimization but equally support sustainability?
I mean, we're looking at several different technologies, right, from a digitalization standpoint. A lot of our optimization is done in-house. We have a supply chain team that works daily on optimizations. The purchasing group gets pulled into it because a lot of our contracts in the past didn't have a lot of flexibility into them in the contract. So we try and make our contracts more flexible so that when we do that optimization, we can switch modes to more optimized modes. Digitalization tools, I mean, from the supply chain, I think somebody from our supply chain team would have to talk about that. From a purchasing standpoint, we are certainly using a bevy of digitalization tools to make our job faster and more efficient.
And Flavio, I know the new leadership at Wallenius, digitalization is a key mantra, a key part of the vision, the strategy going forward. Can you kind of expand on that, and what's that going to mean in terms of supply chain and particularly the road to net zero or certainly reduced emissions?
I'll probably apply that to the ships, right? As an example, we had to we've been working on that. So just to give an idea, since 2000. From 2008 to 2020, we have reduced, carbon intensity by 1/3 within WW. So we've, adopted a couple of things, including, using digitalization. So we have installed, for instance, sensors, all our ships that gives us, as the auto industry, telemetrics, where we can, live, see the routes of the ships, the speed. And if they're using the route that's been assigned to the captains. So just to give an example, we had, before, ships going full speed, captain want to make sure that he will meet the ETA, on the other port, on the next port, and then, he'll get there on time, burning a lot of fuel, but when he gets there, the port is congested and the ship is going to sit for 5 days. So things like that doesn't happen anymore because now we can monitor, we have a control tower looking at all the ships at all time, and we can communicate with the ships directly, and say, hey, you're going, faster than you should, when you get to the next port, you're going to wait for 3 days anyway, so go echo speed and, manage that better. So that's one example. The other thing we've done, we partner with a company in Europe, like defouling the hull is something very important that helps you also to save fuel. As the ships, will sail a little smoother. So we partner with a company there. They have a robot that, as we are sailing, it goes down the hull and keeps cleaning the hull, and it finish the work as we come alongside the berth. So we've done a number of things to help that, to optimize the routes, to make sure we use echo speed when we can, and save fuel. So there are a number of things that we are doing, and we do the same on the land as well in our terminals and trucking companies.
Excellent. Okay, coming to you on your multimodal strategies, and you mentioned selecting the right modes to reduce emissions, decarbonise your footprint. Is there a danger by moving towards multimodal strategies, you're actually increasing the number of touch points, the number of handovers? This could lead to more damage issues or more disruption and potential disruption in the supply chain. So how are you sort of balancing your sustainability KPIs and progress versus, say, on the quality side, for example?
I would say a lot of our mode optimizations that we're looking at, we're not creating additional touches on most of those. It's the same number of touches. It just is, where does the touching happen, right? But certainly quality is always an issue when we do have to change multiple times. We've been talking about ports and port capacity, and do you move stuff out of a port and then reload outside of a port? That I think we have to get past those issues with transparency and data, right? But generally when we're talking about modal changes, it's truck to rail, it's rail to short sea, and those changes they don't give us that many more touches. Just trying to think. So I would say flexibility in the network, right, for when it comes to modes, but certainly anytime we have that, we pay extra attention to our quality with our partners and make sure that we've got the right tools in place to minimize damage.
Yeah, definitely. And then, picking on that point about data, and perhaps I'll come to you, Sharman, on this. We've heard there is a need for greater transparency, greater standardization. Perhaps is there a need for centralized governance and control of data to make sure it's comparable, reliable, accurate? I guess specifically when it comes to the green kind of figures and the sustainability calculations coming through.
Absolutely. I mean, we actually, just at lunch, had this conversation about standardization and maybe getting with the AIAG and talking about, making some of this technology standardized, because, I mean, our drivers are, using 3 apps sometimes, and it's just like, we got to use this one for this company and this one for this one, and then there's ours, and it's all over the place. So I think definitely, yes, there's definitely a need, because it's going to slow things down, and we definitely don't want to lose any more drivers.
Definitely. And Kurt, if I come to you on that and sort of the standardization of the information you're receiving from your suppliers, presumably, do they go through a centralized platform? Is it all coming in the same form and shape? Or are you having to manually kind of control that and interpret the data that comes through?
I would say especially on the finished vehicle side, it runs through WW's system. So there's a set of standards that have to be met, and there's a certain format that data has to come in through their system. So I think, I would almost say it doesn't, maybe it doesn't all look the same when it comes through, but by the time it gets spit out of their system, it comes to us as a standardized format.
Should I say I've been hogging all the questions, but if our audience do have any, please do put your hands up and let me know. I'm keen to get you involved as well, or give you the opportunity. And we're getting close towards the end of the session, so I want to start looking ahead. We've already had some predictions, which we'll definitely hold you to, but looking at the current supply chain models that we have, do you see them being fit for purpose for tomorrow's supply chain and vehicle logistics needs in terms of environmental performance? Does the industry dramatically need to rethink the models, distribution, and network designs?
I think absolutely. I think they should be changing now, not just for this, because, I mean, the last couple years has thrown us for a loop, and the way that everything used to work is completely different than now. I mean, there's ebbs and flows and all-out stops. So, it used to be that, the OEMs would rely on a backhaul possibly from their competitor or whatever, but we can't count on the backhaul anymore. I mean, we can't bid like we used to bid. Things have to change now. They have to get more efficient, or the prices have to go up. And I know they have been, but it's definitely not, we can't live up to our commitments as far as quality. I guess quality is not the right word. Consistency, if the market's not consistent, if the industry's not consistent, because we can't have nothing for 3 weeks and then all of a sudden we have 1,000 units and where are your trucks? It just doesn't work like that. And you're losing the backhauls on one end, and then this one turns on, and then this one turns off, and then as soon as this one turns back on, then this one turns off, and we're just like, we can't win. So I think there's a lot of discussions that we have with our customers. I think that just being transparent and honest is probably always the best way to go about it right now.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think was, Chris Stiles said this morning, what we were 2 years ago, we might never go back to that, right? So I think it's finally time for us to start looking forward, right? So what is the future of logistics? How can we avoid those, on and off, whether you share capacity or, it's really about optimizing, the current supply chain that we have. The product has changed, the market is changing, the regulations are different now. So I think it's time for us to start adapting to that, to look for better solutions in the future. Kurt mentioned something very important that a lot of, people don't pay attention to that, but as we are operating, like over 130 ships, you take one trade lane, for example, the Atlantic trade, and then you have 4 ships, coming per month from Europe to the US. We have 70% utilization on the first, maybe 70% on the second, the same on the third, and then you have like cargo for 2 ships on the last vessel of the month. Why can't we have a better, forecast, a better planning, and a more even, shipping, planning? So that helps, I think, us as a shipping line. Will help the terminal, will help the trucking company to have a better, flow of cargo going through the chain. So I guess, it's about time to, for us to start talking about those issues and see how we can improve it.
Definitely. And Kurt, that echoes I think what Kurt said right at the beginning was about consistency, and that being an ultimate goal, really. If you care to expand on that a little bit further.
Well, I think we have great ideas of how we're going to solve the consistency problem, and then as soon as we implement them, they blow up. So it's kind of a moving target, right? But I know at least from Nissan's standpoint, we don't want to turn the plan on, turn the plan off. So I think it's really just finding that. It's forecasting, it's planning. Maybe we can't run our lines as fast as we want to run our lines because we want to run them more consistently and not run out all of our parts and then have to shut down. So I'm definitely not the strategist when it comes to stabilizing production, but I know we've got some really smart people that are, and we'll come up with a plan. Hopefully it'll work without any surprises, shutdown of cities and those uncontrollables, but it's got to be the goal.
There's clearly momentum, the dial's being moved here in terms of sustainability, what industry is achieving. What needs to happen to ensure that momentum keeps going and we don't let the day-to-day issues kind of get in the way of that? What can we do further? How do we need to intensify conversations? Who needs to get involved? And what can we do to keep really driving low carbon logistics?
I think it's, I can go first if you want. So it's hard not to get involved on the day-to-day, right? However, this is not going away. So it's not like, I won't talk about it. Maybe it will fix itself. It won't, right? So new regulations are out there. We have to reduce, carbon intensity. We have to talk about it. We have to have this conversation, these kind of forums. We have to have, meetings, one-on-one, between customers and suppliers. But we have to talk about it. This is not going away. Targets have been set. Like I said, January, 2023, it's a pretty big one that we have to start complying with, and that will impact everyone in this room here.
Great.
I think it takes a dedicated team, right? I mean, if you're in the day-to-day, you're in the day-to-day, right? And so I think it takes a dedicated team. It takes a vision, a strategy, and a dedicated team to stay on that path to do trials with our partners, to see what works, to see what doesn't work. But I think you have to have a team dedicated to that strategy, and then let the day-to-day folks do their day-to-day. I definitely think flexibility in the network is key, at least for us in the day-to-day. And when we do get back to some greater stability in production, stability in rail car supply, stability in carriers. Once we stabilize in a port or a rail ramp, then we should be able to stabilize our trucking at that point. I think once we get to that point, then we can start integrating, some of this greater strategy into the network. But I think, to me right now, that's the biggest thing, is that flexibility in the network, and then try and incorporate as much as we can the lowest carbon solution where we can.
And I think that's probably a perfect note to end on. There is progress being made, fantastic progress being made, and that's going to only increase, as you say, when things start to stabilise, which I'm sure will be next year. I'm sure, right?
I don't know. Let Sharman predict it.
I didn't predict anything. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Great. Well, I've pretty much run out of time, so I want to thank our guests and join me, please, in thanking them for sharing their insights and knowledge.
Thank you.